Peace and blessings. This is Nachanan. Welcome to Critique of the Peer Review Science channel. Today we go over some peer review data dealing in Afro-Asiatic linguistics. The name of this text is Ancient Egyptian and Afro-Asiatic. I read every chapter of this text. Each chapter gave me something. There is no conclusive evidence on Afro-Asiatic. The strongest chapter, to me, being a college student that studies collegiately linguistics and also going for my master's in linguistics, the most beneficial chapter, according to the standard comparative method or the historical comparative method, sometimes called the comparative reconstruction method, is chapter 7. And I say this on basis that chapter 7 deals strictly, in the strictest sense, with the historical linguistic method that we are taught in college. A lot of the other chapters dealt in divergent methodologies, dealing with mathematics, etc. That is more of a probable tool rather than an actual historical linguistic method. So chapter 7 would be, even though this whole text has no conclusive or apodictic section, it's just various researchers at a conference that put their linguistics to the test. And to me, as a actual linguist, I would see chapter 7 being on lines exactly with the historical method. And we share everything in common as historical linguists is if it's not in the method of establishing the basis of a relationship between language families, which is the two criteria, which is phonology and morphology together. It can't be no phonology and morphology, or it can't be just strictly morphology and no phonology. Those two enterprises got to come together to establish a linguistic relationship between language families. To classify language families, that's kind of different. We are learning morphological topology, which linguists use morphological topology to classify languages as well. So there's various ways to actually classify languages, and there are ways to actually prove that these languages are related. There is one standard way, that is the historical comparative method. So we're going to read some parts of this chapter. Chapter 7, Rethinking the Relationship Between the Egyptian and Semitic, the Lexical, Phonological, and Morphological Evidence. Also, Ern M. Wilson Wright is a brilliant linguist and also a Semitic linguist as well, Afro-Asiatic linguist. The author states, although Egyptologists and Semiticists alike agree that Egyptian and Semitic are genetically related based on morphological evidence, they have yet to establish systematic sound correspondences between the two language families. The lack of sound correspondences, in turn, raises doubts about the relationship between Egyptian and Semitic and necessitates a renewed analysis of their supposedly shared features. In this chapter, I will review the lexical, phonological, and morphological evidence for a genetic relationship between Semitic and Egyptian by comparing Proto-Semitic and internally reconstructed Egyptian forms, a standard historical linguistic procedure that has yet to be applied to these two language families. So I just want to tell people that, as I've been saying for years, due to my background in historical linguistics, when I have evaluated the Semitic and Egyptian correspondences, It is not the historical comparative method, not the one that I am trained in academically. It's something totally diverges, totally different than what we are being trained, or in an example of Indo-European, how Indo-European language families are constructed. It doesn't have or mirror that same. It says, based on this comparison, I will argue that there is insufficient evidence to support a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Semitic. I want people to analyze that we also have been saying this, and this is timely peer-reviewed data that says the exact same thing I have been saying, and every historical linguist have been saying, even though it is generally accepted as a working hypothesis. But scientifically, it's just not uh, scientifically established, right? That's what the data says here, and this historical linguist says that it is insufficient evidence, right, to support a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Semitic. So if Egyptian and Semitic, we use critical thinking, and we say if Egyptian and Semitic is not supported, those two make two of the branches of the 5 or 6 branches of Afro-Asiatic. That means the total language family is unscientific. In historical linguistics, when you have a language family, all of the branches are related to each other. All of the daughter languages and sister languages are actually related to each other and derived from a common ancestor. So if one of the two major branches are not related, Chadic is not related, then this calls for an unscientific uh, view, and this calls for another analysis. The other analysis we have already been demonstrating, but let's continue. It says, I will argue that there is insufficient evidence to support a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Semitic. This is not to say that the two languages are not genetically related, only that it is impossible to detect a genetic relationship between them using current methodology. See that? So, same thing applies when you hear people say, oh, Sumerian and Bantu are related. Sumerian, a known language isolate in peer-reviewed data, and Bantu is already hypothetically known to be within Niger Congo, hypothetically. Uh, we find no peer-reviewed data that they are not, or if they are related or not. There's no peer-reviewed data that established whether they are or rather they scientifically are not in this definite order. But being that Sumerian is an isolate, and being that Bantu or hypothetically forms under Niger Congo language family, then it is impossible to say that they are or isn't. See, this is the same way with Afro-Asiatic. It's the same way with Egyptian and Semitic, where no one's doubting whether they is or not, even though we say they are not exactly how this data says that it's not established, it's insufficient, they are not genetic related. But whether we can prove it by this common methodology, it's impossible. And this historical linguist shares the same exact sentiment that I'll read it again here, not to take a lot of time, but it says this is not to say that the two languages are not genetically related. Like, you see some pseudo linguists say that Sumerian and Bantu is related, but there's no peer reviewed data that establishes that Sumerian are isolated is related to Bantu, which falls under Niger Congo, right? But do we actually have a method to prove it? It says only that it is impossible to detect genetic relationship between them using current methodology. The current methodology of the standard historical method between Egyptian and Semitic uh, impossible with this historical method. And it's simply to us is that it's just simply not related. It doesn't show because it's not related. Now, in this section, it gets into the methodology, which I want to discuss something with y'all dealing with phonology, and this also poses a problem with comparing Egyptian. Its phonology is not too good. So let's check that out here. It says previous attempts to compare Egyptian and Semitic have suffered from several methodological problems, 7 problems, ranging from improper data selection to phonological laxity or laxicity. Now, improper data selection is key with me. I always look into where you getting your data from. Where is this source coming from? Where is your lexical items coming from? Some of these dictionaries are not transcribed properly. They don't have a one-to-one mutual intelligibility with real life speakers who actually speak it. So it is improper data selection. Where the source is untimely or is it timely is part, and also laxicity. Now it says, before embarking on my own analysis, I will review these issues, explain why they are problematic, and suggest methods for avoiding them. The most serious problem involves the selection of items for comparison, because Egyptian forms a language family by itself. Its most natural counterpart for comparison is Proto-Semitic and not the individual Semitic languages. Nevertheless, many scholars compare Egyptian forms with forms attested in only one Semitic language, a procedure that Lau Campbell and William J. Poser dubbed reaching down. Such an approach relies on problematic assumptions about the distribution and survival of cognates and is akin to comparing apples with apple trees. For a form found in Arabic to have an Egyptian cognate, for example, we must assume that it was lost independently in East Semitic, Ethiope-Semitic, modern South Arabian, ancient South Arabian, and Northwest Semitic. While such a scenario is theoretically possible, it is highly improbable and adds an extra layer of uncertainty to the process of comparison and reconstruction. To avoid this pitfall, I will only compare Proto-Semitic and internally reconstructed Egyptian forms in this chapter. So this historical linguist will compare Proto-Semitic with reconstructed Egyptian forms. And this historical linguist is trying to see what the current standard historical method that I am trained in college and most linguists are, will that suffice in establishing that Egyptian and Semitic are related? And it's going to surprise some of you. Here's the thing: as someone who do linguistic work, who submitted to a linguistic journal, and who is doing continued work in the field of linguistics, and this is where even we came across problematic issues of the phonology, the phonology of Egyptian. Now let's read. The phonology of Egyptian itself poses problems for linguistic comparison. It says that. I didn't make it up. Netchaneb didn't make it up. Dr. Campbell didn't make it up. This is well known in actual people who are actually in the field, who does scientific work, right? And not just ambiguous YouTube comparisons. Now, it says the phonology of Egyptian itself also poses problems for linguistic comparison. Scholarly transcription of Egyptian does not always reflect the phonology of the underlying language, and so some scholars have sought to reconstruct the phonological system of earlier Egyptian on the basis of internal evidence, transcriptions into other languages, and Afro-Asiatic cognates. None of these reconstructions, however, has won unanimous acceptance. See? So this is why transcription poses errors, and I'll go back here, I'll highlight this, because the phonology itself, right, And again, I didn't say that. This is from my actual linguist, Egyptologist, Afro-Asiatic linguists here. And this says the phonology of Egyptian itself poses problems for linguistic comparisons. And it mentions the transcription of Egyptian, right? Something that Dr. Cambone gifted this community with. I say gifted. All right. So scholarly transcription of Egyptian, and it says does not always reflect. All right. Oh, sorry about that. And does not always reflect the phonology of the language. All right. So that means that we must do what? We must reconstruct Egyptian. Dr. Cambone gifted this to the community in at least 2016, from 2016, I think, to 2018. And then that's when me and Dr. Sati attempted to do a linguistic work, which our work is still in progress and is very difficult, 5 years strong on our linguistic project. It said, for the purposes of this chapter, I have adopted James P. Allen's reconstruction of early Egyptian phonology with a few minor changes, since, as Carsten Puce notes, he relies less on potential Semitic cognates than other scholars. This is important because over-reliance on proposed cognates can lead to circular arguments where scholars reconstruct Egyptian on the basis of Semitic forms and then compare Egyptian words and morphemes to those same Semitic forms. So it's saying that these scholars are actually reconstructing Egyptian off of Semitic forms and then comparing Egyptian that they reconstructed off of Semitic to Semitic forms. This is an excellent linguist. I'll highlight that in green. Oh, blue. Allen, for example, reconstructs the value of the Egyptian phoneme conventionally transcribed as Z as a voiceless interdental fricative on the basis of cognate sets like Proto-Central Semitic and Egyptian transliteration here, Tamaris. In order to avoid circularity, therefore, I will disregard any reconstructions of Egyptian that assume a genetic relationship between Semitic and Egyptian, even when doing so leaves some Egyptian graphemes without a definite phonemic value. Egyptian vowels cause as much trouble as Egyptian consonants. This is another thing we have been stating here. Because of the borrowed falls the Coptic, where most Egyptologists are pulling sounds from the Coptic would have tremendous borrowing. So let's get into this. Now it says, for most of its history, Egyptian was written in a largely vowelless orthography. And as a result, most comparisons. Oh no. Oh, this was getting good. Okay. But sorry, I lost the page. I clicked something, but just to let y'all know, we was discussing the problematic issues with transliterations, that it doesn't reflect the actual languages. It doesn't reflect sound. We see that Egyptian is completely vowelless. It doesn't it have vowels until it gets to Coptic. So it's a lot. You would have to reconstruct Egyptian as this. We have been saying this for years. We have not seen none of these YouTube scholars or whatever they are not doing any reconstruct. They don't even know where to begin to even do it, and I'm not going to tell them. I have offered my assistance, and I was met with, oh man, disrespect, disregard, or whatever. But here we see top linguists, professional linguists who are writing in peer reviewed data saying the exact same thing. All right. All right. Sorry about that. I hit the page by mistake and just get out of it. They should have this a little better, but it's all good. Linguistics is so beautiful, though. It's make you look at the world differently. All right. It says Egyptian vowels cause as much trouble as Egyptian consonants. For most of its history, Egyptian was written in a largely vowelless orthography, and as a result, most comparisons of Egyptian and Semitic ignore Egyptian vowels entirely. Do y'all know that part of comparative linguistics, the comparative historical method is vowels? Right? We compare vowels as well, not just consonants. Let's continue. So doing so, however, increases the probability of chance similarity by decreasing the number of segments available for comparison. As Don Range notes, it is much easier to match shorter sequences than longer ones. Accordingly, I have reconstructed the vowels of earlier Egyptian using evidence from Coptic and foreign transcriptions were available. So Coptic, this excellent linguist is, reconstructing based not off Semitic, but based off of Coptic, which is feasible. All right, which also would actually have problems itself when just depending on Coptic. Semantic promiscuity also complicates the comparison of Egyptian and Semitic. And you see some scholars stretching the definitions and stuff like that. Uh, some scholars allow for significant semantic leeway between the Semitic and Egyptian forms being compared. To cite a rather extreme example, Gobor Takacs compares Egyptian D spool real with Proto-Semitic, look like I tree. While such a coordinate set is theoretically possible, it requires a series of highly specific semantic changes that cannot be independently verified and that ultimately rely on the assumption of Egypto-Semitic relatedness to be plausible. If the goal is to demonstrate the relationship between Egyptian and Semitic, then semantic shifts should be avoided, and we should focus on words that translate each other and morphemes that perform the same function. So, as you see here, this excellent linguist will give an example of what we are seeing on YouTube, actually, where we are finding guys looking at words that look similar. The meaning in its functionality is not exact. In the definitions, the semantic field is being unequivocally stretched. And this excellent scholar talks on the issues in a standard historical linguistic perspective, the same historical linguistics where we are learning in college. I'm not learning all these other methods. I am learning the genetic relationship between language families are used from this method. And that's, as a college student, that's all I can teach on. All right. It says some scholars allow considerable phonological leeway in comparing Semitic and Egyptian forms. One common Egypto-Semitic comparison involves the word seven. So it gives you the word seven. It gives you this Proto-Semitic form you see is reconstructed in Egyptian. It's reconstructed. Even though these words only coincide actually in the initial voices ever of fricative, the remaining phonemes I and A, okay, B and F, and um, this I don't know this name, but this is on the IPA. I can easily look up the IPA, or just look up the IPA, look up the symbol, and you'll see the exact transcription name for this. And you will have X. And it says these are sufficiently different to warrant some sort of historical explanation, especially given that 5 of them are found in both language families. Yet proponents of this cognitive set do not suggest a regular condition sound changes to explain the differences between Semitic and Egyptian forms. And ultimately, the comparison of these forms rests on the assumption that Egyptian and Semitic are related. See, these are assumptions. This linguist is excellent. If, however, our goal is to test the relationship between Egyptian and Semitic, we cannot rely on ad hoc sound correspondences, nor can we posit metatheses, as in the case of reconstructed Egyptian and Proto-Semitic. Instead, we must insist on exact or near exact sound correspondences. Wow. This linguist is going by the method. Keeping in mind the differences between the phonological systems of Proto-Semitic and reconstructed Egyptian. See, this is very important here, and this is what we've been saying for a long time, and it's still an issue as I see people comparisons. Even in peer-reviewed data, that was just like, wow, and this is why the field is still ambiguous. This is why Afro-Asiatic linguistics is ambiguous. Right. So I looked up some peer reviews of this text I'm reading, and still is ambiguous. Even a peer review or the review. I'm looking up reviews, and there's still no definite. And even from the reviewers who reviewed this text in peer review, they even themselves said chapter seven is very strong. And from a historical linguistic standpoint, this is the strongest chapter of this text. And this is the text we at Kadika support because it's simple. This is what we're learning in historical linguistics. This is what we're learning in linguistics. We're learning this particular method and these particular problems in doing the procedures. We have to overcome these limitations before we can, play around with even the possibility of it being a reality. And this is why I say Afro-Asiatic is like Dr. Seuss to me. I look at Afro-Asiatic and I look at it as Dr. Seuss. It's not the historical comparative linguistic method that I am being trained in. It's something totally different, and it is not nothing that we are being trained in. But again, it says, finally, some scholars engage in selective parsing in order to increase the similarity between Egyptian and Semitic forms. So, selective parsing. This is interesting. Selective parsing. A marquee example of this practice is the word for tongue, Proto-Semitic lisan, and reconstructed Egyptian nis or nyos. The Semitic form features an extra syllable not found in Egyptian. And so proponents of this cognate set must parse the Semitic form as lisan. Yet there is no inter-Semitic evidence for splitting into two morphemes. And without such evidence, the proponents of this cognate set must assume the very relationship they are trying to prove. Oh, man, this is crucial. Now, this is a historical linguist. This is an example of an excellent Historical linguist, someone who is looking at the data unbiasedly, looking at the data, whether he cares if it's genetic related or not. So this is an unbiased researcher, and he is strictly going by historical linguistic method. And from that, he is evaluating terms that is not plausible for a comparison because the Semitic forms cannot back them. So in Semitic, as this form, there is no evidence of it branching into another morpheme. This is good work. This is excellent. Peer review data. And this is what we try to keep the gold standard of research. Right. Let's continue. I know y'all want to continue reading. I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna go ahead and use the restroom, and y'all read this yellow part and get y'all AIs, get to looking up some of these terms and plugging them in. All right. Get y'all perplexities and things of that nature. Okay, 7.2 lexicon and phonology. Lexical and phonological comparisons are inextricably intertwined. Cognate sets provide the raw data for positing sound correspondences between languages, and these sound correspondences in turn allow scholars to identify additional cognates. In this section, therefore, I will compare Proto-Semitic and internally reconstructed Egyptian basic vocabulary using the Leipzig-Jakarta list as a means of identifying both cognates and sound correspondences. So as you see, this excellent linguist is about to embark on the hallmark of historical linguistics, is to compare Proto-Semitic with the reconstructed Egyptian forms, all right, as linguists should. And it says, I will only count word pairs that exhibit exact or near exact phonological correspondences as potential cognates and will not posit selective parsing or metathesis, which I used to say metathesis. I don't know why I like metathesis. But it says the results of this comparison can be found in table 7.1. Out of the 100 entries in the Leipzig list, Proto-Semitic and internally reconstructed Egyptian exhibit two close matches in basic vocabulary and non-problematic ones in the following sections. I will review these potential cognate sets and show that they do not provide enough evidence to establish Semitic sound correspondences between reconstructed Egyptian and Proto-Semitic. In fact, the low number of potential cognates undermines the plausibility of a genetic relationship between Semitic and Egyptian. Oh man. So do y'all want to look at this chart? Let's check this chart out. Wow. Posited the chart. Excellent data. Even though it seems like I wish I could make it. I wish I could make it bigger. But this scholar, historical linguist, is comparing Proto-Semitic with internally reconstructed Egyptian basic vocabulary, and these Proto-Semitic cognates, well, not cognates, sorry, this Proto-Semitic basic vocabulary and internally reconstructed Egyptian vocabulary does not posit enough evidence to posit a genetic relationship. This is timely peer-reviewed data. All right, and it says, in fact, the low number of potential cognates undermines the plausibility of a genetic relationship between Semitic and Egyptian. Then this excellent historical linguist get into reconstructed Egyptian and Proto-Semitic. Reconstructed, they get into some reconstructed forms. Nus, Lason, right? Saying how they are not related, these forms. All right, so we're going to go to the conclusion. And it says the existence of systematic sound correspondences between two or more languages families is one of the hallmarks of genetic relatedness, yet comparison of Proto-Semitic and reconstructed Egyptian basic vocabulary does not provide enough evidence to establish such correspondences. The two most plausible cognate sets exhibit only 6 sound correspondences, each attested once. Wow, this linguist is excellent. Provided the actual demonstration with historical linguistics. One might object that by focusing on basic vocabulary, I ignore large swaths of potential cognates that could furnish additional phonological evidence. But as Ren emphasized, a short list of basic vocabulary is sufficient for assessing the relationship between two languages and establishing sound correspondences between them. All right, so we're not using words like river. We're not using words like land or music instruments or some type of outside cultural item word. In historical linguistics, as this linguist said, that we are using basic vocabulary, the most basic vocabulary we can find. And it says, there is no reason to believe a priori that non-basic vocabulary will contain a higher percentage of cognates than basic vocabulary. Assuming otherwise violates the uniformitarian principle. Man, shout outs to linguistic students worldwide. Oh man, this is good work. In any case, expanding the search for Egypto-Semitic cognates beyond the Leipzig list does not dramatically increase the number of potential cognates. Out of the hundreds of the Egypto-Semitic cognates proposed in Takat's etymological dictionary of Egyptian, only 5 involve lexemes that are tested in both Proto-Semitic and Old Egyptian, and do not involve phonological or semantic changes or selective parsing. So when people begin to stretch the vocabulary, it seems like we can use what they call selective parsing. That's what they're doing. Parsing through data, making the data be similar instead of going through or proving the data in each form. Permissive methodology and thus identifies more cognates in total. It is unlikely that he has somehow missed other possible cognates that are shared between Proto-Semitic and reconstructed Egyptian. Thus, these 5 words likely represent the bulk of the potential cognates that exist between the 2 languages. And because they appear outside the basic vocabulary, they are more likely to be borrowed. And even if they do represent native lexemes in both Semitic and Egyptian, they only suggest a few additional sound correspondences. So this is only a few sound correspondences. Weird. It says the lack of systematic sound correspondence and a low number of potential cognates in basic vocabulary makes it difficult to detect a genetic relationship between Semitic and Egyptian. Do y'all copy? Okay. Linguists estimate that any 2 languages will exhibit up to 6% accidental matching in basic vocabulary by chance alone, even when controlling for phonology and semantics. When we relax these criteria and permit phonological and semantic leeway, selective parsing, and metathesis, this number climbs to 40%. Either way, the number of potential cognates between Egyptian and Semitic is lower than what we would expect from chance alone. So the cognates in Egyptian and Semitic is lower than chance. For the potential cognates between Egyptian and Semitic is lower than what we expect for chance resemblance. Especially given that many of the potential cognates consist solely of unmarked phonemes that appear frequently in both Egyptian and Semitic. The 2 language families share only 2% of their basic vocabulary using the strictest criteria for identifying cognates, and only 11% using a more permissive approach. So only 2% of Egyptian and Proto-Semitic vocabulary in the strictest criteria. And if we are doing selective parsing, only 11%. These languages are not related. It's simple. And these researchers need to get over it. And looking elsewhere, I'm pretty sure there are other languages chatted. There are other languages and Niger Congo languages, and that's a unscientific language family as well. And Nilo-Saharan unscientific it's good to look at those languages, because all of these language families are unestablished, and including Afro-Asiatic, which I doubt exists. And let's see if peer review data backs me when I say I doubt that Afro-Asiatic even exists. The concept of it don't exist. Let's see if we can find this in peer review data. Let's continue. It says it remains to explain the 2 items of shared vocabulary found in the Leipzig Jakarta list, as well as the 5 additional lexical matches between Proto-Semitic and reconstructed Egyptian. Some of these similarities can be attributed to chance. Others, no doubt, resulted from language contact. Egyptian, after all, was in contact with various Semitic languages and language families throughout most of its history, and this context led to exchange of lexical material. Several Egyptian loanwords into Semitic, such as Shatam, Seal, and Hasab to reckon, are even reconstructible to Proto-West Semitic, attesting to prehistoric contact between the two families that may have occurred due to Egyptian influence on second state formation in the Levant. Yo, this linguist is like that. Now it says, it is therefore not implausible that Egyptian was in contact with Proto-Semitic. If, for example, the two Proto-Semitic words for water are not allomorphs, then the form ending in W could be a loan word from Egyptian. Wow. So he is even saying that, like we already know here as historians and academically trained historians and stuff like that, that Semitic speakers been in contact with Negro Egyptian speakers since the very beginning, and it always been like some established contact there. So these similar words, as this scholar is saying in the work, right? So should I go into methodology or morphology? No, I probably wouldn't go into morphology right now. All right. Well, do you talk about the independent pronouns, um, which is, you know, we're going to go into the conclusion. All right. Let's stay into the conclusion. How long is this conclusion? All right, we're going to go into the conclusion here. It says, based on my reconstruction, Egyptian and Semitic share only 3 formally identical morphemes. Wow. Only 3 of them. And these guys on these platforms, they act like this Afro-Asiatic is like RoboCop. But let's continue. It says the third MSG state of, hold on, let's get the exact meaning. Hold on real quick. Oh, okay. So this would be third person masculine singular. Third person masculine singular state of ending a the let's see. And this is another state of form. Oh, so this is first person singular. Okay. All right, so this is third masculine singular state of ending and this first person's singular state of ending nu. In the feminine morpheme at, this number is quite low, especially compared with other language families of roughly comparable time depth, such as Proto-Indo-European. All 3 of these features are short and consist of common unmarked phonemes, which raises the specter of chance resemblance. And due to the lack of systematic sound correspondence between Egyptian and Semitic, it is unclear whether the similarities between these morphemes transcend the purely visual. Furthermore, the state of endings form part of a larger paradigm whose other members either diverge. And it lists first singular, probably feminine singular, third feminine singular, third masculine singular, and third feminine plural state of pronouns, or cannot be reconstructed with confidence. The agreement of a few forms within a large paradigm is not particularly useful for assessing genetic relatedness. As Tom Goldman notes, for example, the pronominal paradigms of Hadza, Sadawi, and Koi Kalahari exhibit a few isolated similarities, even though these language families are not genetically related. These similarities arose through a combination of language contact and chance, and it seems likely that a comparable process gave rise to the similarities in Egyptian and Semitic morphology. So you hear people say, yeah, morphology of Semitic is related to Egyptian, the morphology corresponds. No, it doesn't. This historical linguist says this is most likely similarities. Now it says by chance or contact. Now it says overall morphology does not provide sufficient evidence for positing a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Proto-Semitic. And I have told them that. People think that, oh, I can just use morphology. Yes, morphology is the skeleton of a language, and it is strong evidence. But you have to combine phonology, the sound correspondence, to reconstruct as well as the morphology, not just strictly a few morphological components. So we go to the summary and conclusion. In this chapter, I have undertaken a systematic comparison of reconstructed Egyptian and Proto-Semitic lexicon, phonology, and morphology in order to test the genetic relationship between these. So a historical linguist actually tested it. This is timely. This is 2023. All right. I have been saying this Afro-Asiatic is completely unscientific. The language branches in itself are not related to each other to form an entire language family. Let's continue. According to my analysis, Egyptian and Semitic do not share enough lexical material to establish systematic sound correspondences between them, and even more seriously, the number of lexical items they do share is lower than what we would expect from chance alone. So, according to the evidence, it's probably not even chance. These forms are probably not by even chance is so low. And this ain't nothing. Actually, this ain't nothing new. Majority of historical linguists will tell you. But let's continue. It says it's not even enough. It says Egyptian and Semitic do not share enough lexical material to establish systematic sound correspondences between them. And even more seriously, the number of lexical items they do share is lower than what we would expect from chance alone. Furthermore, the two language families share only 3 morphemes in common, which is a third person masculine masculine singular stative, the first singular stative ending first person, and the feminine morpheme. But these forms are short and consist of common unmarked phonemes, which increases the odds of chance resemblance. Don't you know how they say the feminine T? This is by chance. Now it says the remaining features either diverge or are impossible to compare, profitably due to the limits of internal reconstruction in either Egyptian, and it mentions the third plural suffix pronoun, or Semitic, the causative. The difference between the forms we can reconstruct does not inspire confidence in underlying similarity between the unreconstructable forms. For these reasons, I will argue that there is insufficient evidence to posit a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Proto-Semitic, and we should therefore refrain from using Semitic data for reconstructing Egyptian or vice versa. Wow. I'm gonna let this. Wow. Peer review data said that. Future advances in internal reconstruction may supply more evidence in favor of such a relationship, but for the time being, it is best to proceed as if Egyptian and Proto-Semitic were unrelated. This conclusion, in turn, has consequences for the study of Afro-Asiatic. If Egyptian and Semitic are not genetically related, then only one of them can belong to the Afro-Asiatic phylum, if indeed such a language family exists. Have a good day. Any questions? I'll let y'all get a few questions before I'm out. And this is majority what we learned in college of historical linguistics. We learned the historical linguistic method. And when we look at these language families, even though they are accepted as working hypotheses in nature, in the reality of it, these language families are not genetically related to each other. They are not established as this peer review data so eloquently stated. Excellent work from this historical linguist. Any questions, I'll get at you in 2 minutes. Check comments. If not, man, have a beautiful, beautiful evening. All right. So, peace and blessings. Y'all have a nice day and evening.